The date is April 18, 1942. A photograph from the recovered film reels shows a squadron of B-25 Mitchell bombers lined up on the deck of a small aircraft carrier, the USS Hornet. The image is grainy, but the sheer improbability is unmistakable. Medium bombers, designed for land bases, catapulted into the sky from a vessel barely large enough to hold them. Overlaid is a fragment of a broken radio intercept, the last garbled message before silence. Tokyo. Unexpected. How was this even possible? That such a strike could reach the heart of Japan's capital, so far from any American base? The answer lies in a daring gamble, one that would expose weaknesses far deeper than any bomb crater. Behind the operation was a tangled web of motives and tensions. The United States, reeling from the attack on Pearl Harbor less than 5 months earlier, sought to shake Japanese confidence and prove the Pacific was not invulnerable. The idea originated with a squadron commander known for audacity, who proposed using the Hornet's limited deck to launch B-25 bombers, aircraft never before tested for carrier operations. A weathered blueprint, found among declassified Navy records, reveals the modifications made to the carrier's catapults and arresting gear, hastily adapted to this unprecedented mission. But was this strike merely symbolic, or did it reveal cracks in Japan's fortress mentality? The decision to send medium bombers over 600 miles of open ocean was a risk few believed could succeed. The B-25 Mitchell itself was a paradox, a twin-engine bomber capable of carrying up to 3,000 pounds of bombs, yet too large for naval aviation norms. Measuring over 52 feet in wingspan and equipped with multiple .50 caliber machine guns, it was designed for versatility and ruggedness. But its size and weight posed a critical challenge. Could it safely launch from the Hornet's 814-foot deck? According to engineering notes from the U.S. Navy's Aircraft Division, the planes were stripped of non-essential weight, and pilots trained rigorously in short takeoff techniques. Still, the aircraft were vulnerable, limited fuel reserves, no fighter escort, and a return trip over hostile territory. What did the planners miss in their calculations? Was there an assumption that Japan's air defenses were weaker than reality would show? The raid itself unfolded in the early dawn hours. 16 B-25s took off in staggered waves, their engines roaring over the Pacific like an ominous thunderclap. The squadron commander's log describes the eerie calm before the strike. No early warning, no fighter interception. As bombs fell on military and industrial targets in Tokyo, the city's air raid sirens belatedly wailed. Japanese reports later confirmed that the raid caused only limited physical damage, about 50 casualties, and scattered destruction. But the psychological shock was immense. How could Tokyo's defenses have been so easily breached? Why did radar stations fail to detect the aircraft? The official Japanese records remain frustratingly vague, hinting at confusion and disbelief rather than coordinated response. In the aftermath, the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy scrambled to respond. Air defense units were restructured, anti-aircraft batteries repositioned and upgraded with new calibers, including the feared Type 88 75mm guns. Mitsubishi engineers were tasked with improving fighter aircraft interception protocols, and a directive circulated emphasizing the need for constant aerial patrols around the capital. Yet, according to intercepted communications, there was a persistent underestimation of American capabilities. Was this complacency born of arrogance or simply the fog of war? The raid exposed a critical blind spot in Japan's defensive doctrine, a blind spot that would have consequences far beyond the initial shock. By mid-1942, the Doolittle raid had shifted from a bold experiment to a symbol of vulnerability. Resources were funneled into bolstering Tokyo's air defenses, but the strain was evident. Maps in the Japanese War Ministry archives reveal a frantic redistribution of fighter squadrons, pulling assets from other critical fronts. Internal memos express frustration at the difficulty of defending a sprawling metropolis with limited radar coverage and unreliable communication lines. The raid forced a strategic reassessment. Could Japan truly safeguard its core cities? Or was this just the beginning of a new phase in aerial warfare? The tension in these documents is palpable, an empire shaken by a surprise strike that defied all prior assumptions. Each episode is a document I pull from the dust of the archives. Share your own stories. Many of you have relatives who lived through that time, and your words help connect personal memory with archival evidence. Stay curious. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episode tomorrow. In the immediate aftermath of the raid, the Japanese emperor's palace remained untouched. No physical scars, yet an invisible tremor rippled through the corridors of power. A fragmented radio transcript, recovered from a Japanese air defense command post, reveals frantic orders. Increase vigilance. Unknown route. Prepare fighters. The voice is strained, betraying the shock that the capital's skies had been breached by what was supposed to be an impossible attack. Yet, hidden beneath the surface of panic was a deeper failure. A systemic inability to connect scattered intelligence, reports into a coherent picture. Why did the early warning systems fail so catastrophically? The answer lies in the fractured command structure and outdated radar technology, which lacked integration and real-time communication. The psychological impact extended far beyond military circles. A clandestine photograph, taken by a street-level observer, shows Tokyo's skyline veiled in smoke, not from the raid's bombs, but from hastily ignited fires meant to simulate larger destruction and confuse. Enemy reconnaissance. Civilians whispered rumors of American bombers over the city, stories dismissed by official channels as propaganda or hallucination. Yet the fact remained: the capital had been exposed, if only briefly. According to memoirs of a Japanese intelligence officer, the raid shattered the myth of invulnerability that had bolstered national morale. What was Japan's leadership willing to admit? And what truths were buried beneath layers of censorship and patriotic fervor? Meanwhile, on the American side, the raid was hailed as a triumph of ingenuity and nerve. Yet the truth was more complex. Flight logs reveal that several B-25s ran dangerously low on fuel, forcing crews to ditch or bail out over China and the East China Sea. Rescue operations, coordinated with local Chinese resistance, were perilous and uncertain. The cost of the mission was high, and many airmen faced capture or death. Why then was such a high-risk operation greenlit? Some argue it was a calculated gamble to deliver a morale boost to the American public and military. Others suggest it was a desperate bid to prove the feasibility of carrier-launched bombing raids beyond the range of conventional fighters. What internal debates shaped this decision, and how close did the mission come to being aborted? The raid's repercussions also extended into the shadows of espionage and counterintelligence. Japanese countermeasures included increased surveillance of suspected collaborators and tightening control over information flow. A recovered cipher sheet indicates heightened encryption protocols following the raid, hinting at fears that operational details had been leaked. Meanwhile, American intelligence intercepted Japanese communications, revealing confusion over the attacker's origin. Was there a mole within Japan's military intelligence, or did the raid exploit a blind spot created by overconfidence and underestimation? The layers of secrecy and deception surrounding the operation suggest a complex game of shadows in which every detail mattered, and some details were deliberately obscured. As months passed, the raid's symbolic power endured far more than its physical damage. In Tokyo, hidden reports circulated, assessing vulnerabilities in urban infrastructure and emergency response preparedness. A faded blueprint of Tokyo's industrial zones, annotated with notes from Japanese civil defense engineers, reveals a city scrambling to fortify against future airborne threats. Yet, these efforts were hampered by resource shortages and internal power struggles between military branches. How much of the city's defense was real, and how much was illusion? The raid had cracked open a door to a new kind of warfare, one where the enemy could reach even the most guarded heartlands. What would it take for Japan to seal that breach? The raid also reshaped American military doctrine. Debriefings emphasize lessons learned about carrier operations and the limitations of medium bombers in naval contexts. Plans for more versatile aircraft carriers and longer-range bombers were accelerated. The raid was a proof of concept, but also a warning. Future operations would require better coordination, intelligence, and technology. Behind closed doors, commanders debated the next steps, how to leverage this precedent without repeating its costly mistakes. Could the element of surprise be maintained in an increasingly fortified Pacific theater? Or was the Doolittle raid merely the opening salvo in a prolonged, brutal contest for air supremacy? The fragile balance between innovation and risk, hope and reality, played out in every document, photo, and intercepted message. The B-25s that struck Tokyo from an aircraft carrier were more than a tactical feat. They were a crack in the armor of myth and a catalyst for change. But the true cost, the hidden failures, and the unanswered questions lingered long after the smoke cleared. How much did the raid alter the course of the war? And how many secrets still lie buried beneath the rubble of history? The night skies over Tokyo remained restless long after the raid's echoes faded. A recently unearthed weather log from the Hornet's navigator reveals that the mission depended on a narrow meteorological window, low clouds, and a moonless night to mask the bomber's approach. Yet, the same report notes unexpected wind shifts that threatened to scatter the formation. The pilot's skill was tested against nature itself. How many near disasters were concealed behind official reports of flawless execution? Could this fragile balance have tipped, turning a daring strike into a catastrophic failure? The tension between human courage and uncontrollable elements adds an unseen layer to the narrative. On the ground, the Japanese military's intelligence apparatus scrambled to reinterpret the raid's meaning. A classified telegram intercepted weeks later shows high command debating whether the raid was a prelude to a larger invasion or merely a symbolic gesture. The lack of follow-up attacks deepened confusion. Some commanders argued for immediate retaliation. Others urged caution, fearing overextension. A faded map, marked with proposed counterstrike zones, reveals how seriously Japan considered retaliatory options, even as internal disagreements stalled decisive action. What internal fractures within the leadership allowed this uncertainty to persist? Did the raid expose not just external vulnerabilities, but also cracks within Japan's strategic cohesion? In the shadowed hangars of the Hornet, maintenance crews labored to return the carrier to readiness after the grueling mission. Diaries of an aircraft mechanic detail the hurried repairs to catapult systems strained by the unprecedented launches and engines pushed to their limits. The physical toll on equipment mirrored the mental strain on crews who had flown beyond all expected parameters. Yet, official commendations gloss over these hardships, focusing instead on the mission's symbolic victory. What stories of exhaustion, near failure, and unseen heroism remain untold in the polished narratives? How did these human factors shape the raid's legacy? Meanwhile, the raid forced a profound shift in Japanese civil defense policies. A set of newly issued urban planning documents, stamped confidential, outline emergency evacuation routes and reinforcement plans for key industrial zones. But the plans were constrained by limited resources and competing priorities: armaments production versus civilian safety. A poignant photograph captures workers constructing rudimentary air raid shelters amid looming factories, their faces grim with the weight of uncertainty. Could these measures keep pace with evolving threats? Or were they desperate band-aids on a system ill-prepared for modern aerial warfare? American military strategists, analyzing post-raid intelligence, identified a critical weakness. Japan's radar network was sparse and poorly integrated, allowing the B-25s to slip through undetected. A declassified report recommends accelerated radar deployment and improved communication protocols. Yet, implementing these changes required time and industrial capacity Japan could scarcely spare. A schematic of radar installations shows glaring gaps around Tokyo's approaches. How much did this technological lag determine the raid's success? And could Japan's eventual radar improvements have prevented future penetrations, or merely delayed the inevitable? In the wider Pacific theater, the raid's ripple effects were felt in unexpected places. Allied forces in China and Southeast Asia reported increased Japanese aerial patrols and harsher crackdowns on resistance networks suspected of assisting downed airmen. An intercepted message reveals paranoia spreading through Japanese military intelligence, fueling a cycle of suspicion and repression. This added a dark layer to the conflict, where the raid's tactical success inadvertently intensified suffering on the ground. What unintended consequences did this single strike unleash across the region? And how did these reverberations shape the broader war effort? Behind every file, photograph, and intercepted message, the Doolittle raid remains a prism refracting contradictions, bravery and risk, illusion and reality, triumph and tragedy. It was a moment when the impossible became real, but at a price still measured in shadows. What secrets do the silent witnesses, those planes, their crews, and the cities they touched, still hold? And how will the layers of history continue to unravel? As the months wore on, the full scope of the raid's impact began to crystallize in the most unexpected quarters. A set of encrypted reports from the Japanese War Ministry, only recently decrypted, reveal internal debates over reallocating scarce resources to bolster the capital's defenses. Yet, these documents also expose a troubling reality. The industrial heartland, including vital shipyards and aircraft factories, remained perilously exposed due to competing demands from multiple fronts. A detailed map annotates these vulnerable points, underscored by warnings that future raids could inflict far graver damage. Was the Doolittle raid merely the opening act in a campaign that Japan was structurally ill-prepared to counter? And how much did these strategic dilemmas hasten Japan's eventual decline? In the United States, the raid's legacy was carefully cultivated as a symbol of resolve and ingenuity. Yet behind closed doors, commanders grappled with the high human cost and tactical limitations exposed by the mission. Post-mission evaluations underscored the need for more reliable long-range bombers and enhanced carrier capabilities. A faded photograph shows a meeting of senior naval strategists poring over new aircraft blueprints, their faces etched with the weight of hard lessons learned. Could the daring gamble of launching B-25s from a carrier truly be scaled into a sustainable strategy? Or was it destined to remain a singular, desperate stroke of wartime ingenuity? The survivors of the raid carried their burden long after the war ended. Personal letters and memoir fragments reveal stories of hardship, pilots evading capture, crews grappling with the trauma of near death, and families waiting in uncertain silence. One poignant image captures a reunion decades later, the faces weathered, but eyes still reflecting the intensity of those perilous hours over Tokyo. What fragments of memory have been lost or silenced? And how do these personal histories reshape our understanding of the raid's true cost? Taken together, these layers, military, political, technological, and deeply human, compose a complex mosaic. The raid that stunned Japan was more than a tactical surprise. It was a catalyst that rippled through the war's entire trajectory. Yet within the triumph lies a web of unanswered questions and hidden struggles, inviting us to look beyond the official narratives.